everyone. Welcome back to Inquire Live at Gameday Central alongside Jeff McLane. I am Olivia Reiner. We are coming at you live from the Lincoln Financial Field press box as we get set for the Eagles' primetime Sunday night matchup against the Detroit Lions. Jeff, how you doing?
I'm great, Olivia. Great. Happy to be here. Big game, Sunday night football. And I'm probably a little more excited for this one than I am normally. I think these are probably two of the better teams in the NFC, not only by their record, but by the way they've played over these last several years. In fact, probably the two best teams in the NFC last year, and we were deprived an opportunity to see them play in the NFC Championship. But here we have, finally, Eagles versus the Lions.
Amon-Ra St. Brown wanted this matchup for week one of the regular season. Instead, we got Eagles-Cowboys. Didn't happen. Next best thing. Might as well wait all the way until about halfway through the season, but lots of interesting things going on with both teams. We'll get into that in just a little bit. Before we get into our conversation today, just a reminder, we want you to be a part of it. If you're not over on inquire.com/Eagles Game Day already, you can head on over there, leave us a question or a comment down in the chat. Also, if you're watching over on X, Facebook, YouTube, wherever you are in the world right now, leave us a comment down in the section there, a question, and we will answer some of those throughout our show today. All right, Jeff, I just wanted to give a little update on the inactives list. There's nothing really different or unique or unusual from this inactives list going into today's game. Sam Howell inactive, Mac McWilliams, A.J. Dillon, Drew Kendall, and Ty Robinson. So it's worth noting that Cam Jurgens is active for today's game for the first time since week 7 against the Minnesota Vikings when he sustained a right knee injury early on in that game, eventually dropped out. Brett Toth replaced him for the rest of the way, and Toth has started these last couple games as well. Something that I thought was kind of interesting here during warmups is that Cam Jurgens, while he was out there and he participated in the beginning of the offensive line drills, he did drop out a little bit early and head back to the locker room, let Brett Toth finish the rest of the way. So I'm very curious to see if Jurgens in fact starts in this game and or if it's going to be Toth again. But regardless, how important is strong center play in this game going up against a really talented Detroit Lions defensive front?
Oh, absolutely. Brett Toth, to his credit, has really kind of stepped in these last two games and before that performed admirably in place of Jurgens. We've seen Jurgens be active before and not start. Last year in the NFC Championship game that they didn't play against the Lions, instead against the Commanders. He eventually had to go in that game because Landon Dickerson had played center and he had injured his knee. And Jurgens, despite his back injury at the time, toughed it out and they won the game. And he toughed it out 2 weeks later in the Super Bowl. So we'll see what happens here. I wouldn't say I was completely surprised that he was going to be active for this game, but still has a brace, is wearing a brace now, on his knee, and maybe he just didn't feel 100%, and maybe it'll be Toth that starts, and they have him as the backup just in case. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out. But yeah, the Lions, as you mentioned, have a great defensive front. They have a good defense in terms of, what they will throw at a quarterback, and with Tyler Steen at times giving up pressures, you've seen it from opposing defenses that they'll try and press the interior of the Eagles' offensive line.
Well, we'll see if it is Jurgens or if it is Toth come that first Eagles possession in just a little bit. All right, Jeff, let us set the table for this matchup between these two teams. But before we look at this Lions team, the Eagles are coming off of an impressive, albeit not very offensively splashy, 10-7 road win against the Green Bay Packers. And instead of the conversation coming out of this game being focused on the fact that the Eagles won and that they're 7-2 going into tonight's game, a lot of the conversation has been around A.J. Brown and the comments that he made on a Twitch stream earlier in the week with a friend, expressing some of his frustrations with the state of the offense and in particular his role within the offense. This is not the first time by any stretch of the imagination that A.J. Brown has done this. But if you look a little bit closer into the numbers here, A.J. is coming off of a game where he just had 2 receptions for 13 yards on 3 targets. 2 targets in the first quarter, and then he wasn't targeted again until very late in the fourth quarter when Jalen Hurts made that questionable 4th down heave for Brown late in the game. So much is being made right now about the fact that A.J. Brown is speaking out in a public way. But if you really boil down what he is saying and what his frustrations are, is he valid in having those concerns?
Yeah, and I think this is something that AJ that he's sounded this alarm before about the offense and it being maybe perhaps too conservative, too run heavy, and in today's NFL, typically you want to kind of pass first to get ahead, and then you run the ball. The Eagles have not that has not been their recipe for success for the most part since Nick Sirianni's been the head coach, and more specifically since Jalen Hurts has been the quarterback. And but you can't argue with the success of having an offense that plays that way. The Eagles have won way more than they've lost. They've been to two Super Bowls. They won one playing that way. I hate to kind of paint it in these kind of black or white scenarios because it's not that. It's much more nuanced. You need the pass game, you need the run game, etc. But that being said, um, when you look at this offense, it does lack kind of variation. It does lack kind of the diversity, and it doesn't throw to certain parts of the field. And what you're seeing, because the Eagles are unable to run the ball, is just a lot of zone defenses. And we'll talk about a little bit here in a little bit about the lines and what they're going to do. And it seems like Jalen Hurts has been a little hesitant. And this is not just this year; it's been before this year. That there are times that he won't throw in the certain types of windows, and I think it's some of it is just the type of quarterback that he is in terms of like he isn't going to wow you in terms of the athleticism of the arm and the size. He kind of lacks in that regard. He can make the throws, he can do all that, but I wonder if in the back of his head he's got Nick Sirianni always saying, "Hey, you know what? Don't try and win it all here. Don't force it because a turnover here is way more costly than whatever type of throw you potentially could pull off." And what you've seen over the last 5 years, and again this year, is that when Jalen drops more than any other quarterback, he has the collection of throwing the ball away or scrambling or taking a sack. And I think that's what AJ Brown is talking about. And quite frankly, I'm sure the other receivers on this team can get frustrated at times with that type of with that style of football, and with the way the quarterback is executing at times. Now, look, Jalen's been great in some other games, but there have been times in games when against good defenses that he has struggled.
Well, if there's any area of this Detroit Lions defense that you could point out as being the weak link, it is safe to say that it's the secondary. And it's especially the secondary considering the fact that there is some attrition among that group. No cornerback Terrion Arnold in tonight's game as he's out with an injury. Same thing with safety Kirby Joseph. So the Lions are going to be down two of their top starters in the secondary. The big question is, can the Eagles take advantage of it? We've seen the Lions throughout the season use a ton of man coverage, league high 43.9% of dropbacks this season, according to Next Gen Stats. Jalen Hurts and AJ Brown, especially, they love man coverage. They would love if the Lions stuck to their tendencies and continued to use a bunch of man coverage in tonight's game. Hurts, he has generated the second most yards per attempt and the seventh highest completion rate while throwing for the second most touchdowns to 13 to just one interception against man coverage this season. But that being said, the Eagles have seen plenty of unscouted looks this season. And it would not be a shock to see the Lions come out in a lot of zone coverage, which the Eagles have struggled against this season. So what do you expect to see from this Lions defense? And how could potentially, if the Lions do come out in a lot of zone, how could the Eagles potentially respond to those looks?
Yeah, so we as you've mentioned, the Eagles have seen a lot of unscouted looks this year. They seem to think more than normal. I don't know if that's a fact or not. I think a lot of top offenses that have been successful at various points that will happen to them. So I don't think in any way, shape, or form it's a valid excuse. You have to be prepared for all of that, and quite frankly, you have to be prepared for this formula that we've seen increasingly from defenses that have played the Eagles. Right, they're going to go heavy zone. They're gonna blitz a lot. They're gonna bring a lot of simulated pressures. They're gonna drop into these zones at two high safety shells up top. Um, at the secondary level, they're going to be at the sticks. Vice versa. It doesn't matter. Um, and I imagine that Kelvin Shepard is going to do the same thing here. Look, I mean, yeah, he does run a lot of man, but he runs more zone than he does man. So it's not like he can't do this. It's not like they can't come out and cover four, which is I think the one zone they probably use more than others, and execute that the entire game if they want. He'll probably mix it up, and he'll probably throw in some man on occasion as well. The way you combat man, zone is with zone beaters. And just because you drop in the zones doesn't mean you can't throw deep. Doesn't mean you can't throw deep against quarter, go over the top against quarters. Doesn't mean there aren't holes within, cover two, the turkey hole in between, on the outside of the sideline. Now that doesn't always play to Jalen Hurts' strength on those types of throws, but you can't be passive. I think when you're going up against heavy zone defenses, you got to be willing to throw the ball downfield, because if you're going to try and run screens stuff on the check downs, teams are just going to rally to the ball and make tackles. And this is good defense in terms of tackling the football. I think you do bring up a good point, though, that with the secondary lacking in some starters, but also and perhaps in talent in certain spots, that maybe the Eagles can break tackles. AJ Brown is one of the best at doing that. Dallas Goedert's done it repeatedly over his career. Saquon Barkley, so you can still do that, but sometimes it's hard to rely on that for the full 60 minutes of a game.
The Lions are not going to make it easy up front for Jalen Hurts and the Eagles' offensive line. The Eagles are going from one dominant pass rusher in Micah Parsons to another in Aiden Hutchinson. Hutchinson is actually tied for second in the league in pressures with Parsons. He's tied for number 6th in the league in sacks. So like Parsons, what the Eagles saw both against the Packers and what Parsons did when he was with the Dallas Cowboys, he switches sides a lot, and Hutchinson does a lot of the same things. So Jordan Mailata and Lane Johnson are going to have to be ready to potentially see him. And it really isn't just Hutchinson that has, been generating this pressure along the Lions defensive front. Just the Lions as a whole, they rank 5th in the league in quarterback pressure at 38.5%. And they also blitz at a fairly high rate too. They're 11th in the league at 29.6%. Whether that pressure is coming from Hutchinson off the edge or maybe from potentially the second level on a blitz, what do the Eagles need to do to try to neutralize some of that pressure that the Lions are going to try to generate in tonight's game?
Yeah, I mean, Hutchinson's the guy. He's the X factor. He's the guy that they're circling on the chalkboard during the week leading up into the game, and you just can't let him wreck the game. And that's what they did with Micah Parsons. Parsons had some pressures. They did a few things with him that gave the Eagles trouble, but for the most part, they were able to kind of keep him in check, and it was enough to get them the win. And I think that's all they're asking out of their offense here against Hutchinson. You do make a good point in terms of like, when you have a defensive end that can flip both sides, it's hard to kind of like scheme specifically for that tackle and that side and have certain plays designed to kind of maybe utilize his aggressiveness. You almost leave him unblocked and you run plays off of that. It makes it harder to do that. And Hutchinson, not only is he getting pressures and getting to the quarterback, when he gets to the football, he forces fumbles. He leads the NFL in forced fumbles, and he's done that throughout his entire career. So the Eagles, very good at holding the football. We did see Jalen Hurts fumble for the second time this season last week, but guys have to be very, very much cognizant of that when Hutchinson's on them. And then in terms of facing that pass rush and what Shepard may do in terms of the blitz, he's going to throw sim pressures at the Eagles as well. And that Jalen Hurts has struggled probably more versus those than blitzes, and he'll drop 8 a lot. And rush only 3, it'll look like 4, maybe look like 5, and then all of a sudden in a certain down, maybe 3rd and long, whatever it is, he'll do that. The key to the Eagles, and it was last week, and they just, key to them not performing well was that they just couldn't get much going on the ground again on 1st and 2nd down, and they faced all these 3rd and longs. So they really got to get the run game going. I know we keep repeating this over and over again, and Detroit's a solid run defense, so it's going to be hard for them to do that, but it's just imperative, I think, for this offense to run a certain amount, right, to open things up in terms of down the field, because they're going to have to keep pace with an offense that I think is going to be able to put up some points against this Eagles defense.
Let's flip it over to the Eagles pass rush, which is very much a new look unit over the last week or so. We've seen the additions of Jalen Phillips, an acquisition from the Miami Dolphins leading up to the trade deadline, and Nolan Smith has come back into the mix, coming back from injured reserve after dealing with a triceps injury. And instantly we saw some real strides from this Eagles pass rush this past week against the Green Bay Packers. Jalix Hunt has also been coming on as well, as he has 2 sacks in as many games. And if you look really, though, at the Lions, they have been really strong against pressure. Jared Goff did a really excellent job against the Commanders last week. He was pressured on for over 40% of his dropbacks, and he still completed 9 passes for 107 yards, and he was not sacked. once, even though he was almost pressured on half of his dropbacks. And one of the reasons why he was able to neutralize the Commanders' pass rush was the fact that he was able to get the ball out so quickly. He had a ton of quick passes. He had 14 completions for 191 yards and 3 touchdowns on those quick throws. And we also saw, in addition to some of those quick throws, we also saw a big uptick in play action passes too from the Lions, with Dan Campbell taking over play calling. And we're expecting to see Campbell continue to call the plays in tonight's game. So, what is the key to trying to rattle Goff if he's if he's able to try to neutralize that pass rush and getting the ball out quickly? And what changes do you expect to see from this Lions defense compared to the early portion of the season with Campbell now at the helm calling the plays?
Yeah, so I mean, Jared Goff is a good quarterback. I think when he's under pressure, every quarterback's bad. Let me get that out of the way here. But when he's under pressure, in particular, I think it's worse than maybe a lot of other quarterbacks. He just has a hard time escaping, or he gets rattled. He makes bad decisions under pressure. Now he did well last week, but I think for the large majority of his career, that's when he struggles. Again, every quarterback struggles when under pressure. I think just Goff more than others. So the key for the Lions always is just kind of running the ball like the Eagles, getting those guys going. Jahmyr Gibbs, David Montgomery. You got complementary guys, speed guy and Gibbs, more of a in between tackles guy, and David Montgomery. And so the Eagles run defense will have its hands full in that regard. But in terms of Goff, the play action thing, you bring up a good point. I mean, there was more of it last week with Dan Campbell, and maybe he just wanted to get back to more of that, and that's why he jumped in there, because that's really kind of been what they've done over these last several years when the Lions have kind of been successful. I think Goff's as good as any quarterback when he throws off play action. So, I think you'll continue to see that. But you, again, like the Eagles saw during that little run there when they were able to throw off play action, that you got to be able to run the ball somewhat, or you got to be committed to running the ball to set it up. Now, in terms of Campbell calling plays, I don't know. I mean, we got one game to go on, so I think it's hard to know what his tendencies are. It was interesting that he would do it the week before the Eagles game. It wasn't like the Lions offense was really super struggling. He probably just felt at this time, it's something that maybe could switch things up on teams as they prepare for them. So I don't know what to expect. I think it'll probably be a lot of what they've done when they've been successful. I think they just probably got away from that a little bit, and that's why he jumped in there.
Well, there's no doubt that the Lions are going to want to try to run the ball, and this is probably good timing for the Eagles, considering they have tightened up on the ground significantly. It was not a great start to the season for the Eagles' run defense, but in the last few weeks, perhaps not so coincidentally, with Nakobe Dean coming back into the lineup, the Eagles have been much better against the run. They were very good last week against a very solid running back in Josh Jacobs, who has had some struggles this season, but they limited Josh Jacobs to 3.5 yards per carry. Just in general, over these last few weeks, the defense has been holding opposing rushers to 3.7 yards per carry, which is a stark contrast from the 4.7 yards per carry that they were allowing in weeks 1 through 6. And I think Dean has a lot to do with that. I also think that the addition of Jalen Phillips, for all that was made about his pass rushing ability, he had a really good day against the run last week against the Packers too. As you mentioned, Jeff, the Lions have two very talented running backs, two very different stylistically running backs in Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery, but Gibbs is the one really to watch. He is averaging 5.4 yards per carry, and he's tied for third in the league in rushing touchdowns this season with 8. He's also third in all-purpose touchdowns too, so he can also make some grabs out of the backfield as well, and when at the line of scrimmage too. But the key, I think, the big thing to note here is that when the Lions have lost 3 games this season, they have been held to under 100 rushing yards in each of those games. So the key for the Eagles is going to be stop the run. Jordan Davis, spoke about it earlier in this week. It's going to start with the big guys up front, him being one of them, in trying to slow down both Gibbs and Montgomery. What is the key, really, at the end of the day, to trying to slow those guys down?
Yeah, so they use a lot of the same blocking schemes that the Eagles do. So that it's not like, there are only so many different blocking schemes that you can have, but I think with Dave Montgomery, you see a lot of double team zone blocking, guys trying to get to the second level to create gaps for him to kind of slash through. With Gibbs, it's a little more, probably not as much outside, you'd think, with the speed guy, but he's still kind of pretty much in between the tackles. They just do use some different things with him. So the Eagles had, it's tough when you have two really good running backs to prepare for. So just it mixes things up and makes you have to prepare for a little more in terms of stylistic what the running backs are and the types of schemes that they run in terms of blocking. Nakobe Dean, I think is really kind of come in and settled things down. You've mentioned the numbers, but if you watch the film, it's very evident of what he does, and it's just basically he's not a big guy, but he is strong and he can win at the point of attack. And I think Jahad Campbell has had a really promising rookie year, and who knows what happens down the road with him in terms of where he ends up positionally. I think ultimately it'll probably just always be some sort of hybrid. But I think the run defending was the area that he was probably struggling in the most, and that's why you saw the change. Now they're still keeping Campbell out there for some plays, typically in nickel, typically in base downs. He's on the edge, which I'm not really sure I would stick with, quite frankly, with all the numbers that they have there and guys that are probably a little bigger and better suited to play in that role. We'll see how much they keep doing that. This is their top draft pick, and they don't want to get away from it too much. But, winning is what matters most. And I think at some point you're probably going to see more of Dean at that off-ball linebacker position. And it's not just him. You can't just point to one thing. I think Jalen Carter has gotten his conditioning where it needs to be, and he's been much better over this last month, and he's factored into it as well. They have big boys up front, man. They are committed to stopping the run. Vic Fangio isn't going to help a lot in terms of that regard because he wants to almost compel teams in certain circumstances to run the ball. He'll take that over a deep shot type of pass. So it'll be interesting to see what they do in this game because, as you mentioned, I mean, the Lions have one of the best run offenses. And if they can get going on the ground, it's going to be a long night for that Eagles defense.
Well, speaking of the big boys up front, Jeff, we have discussed plenty of players going into tonight's game. However, if there was one Eagles player you are most intrigued by, who would it be?
Yeah, I'm going to go with Mora Jomo. Had a really good game last week. Excuse me. Everyone at this point knows him calling out the play on that pivotal fourth down stop. That Reed Blankenship caused the fumble, and Jalen Phillips was involved in it as well. Inside zone left. Ajomo called out, and he's a really smart guy. You've talked to him a lot. I've talked to him a lot. He does a lot of film study. He knows, he could pick up on tendencies, but he's also a really good defensive player. And when Milton Williams signed with the Patriots, a lot of people were concerned who's going to step into those shoes because Milton did a lot of the dirty work. That the numbers weren't always eye popping, but he just in terms of the run and in terms of the pass rush, he could get it done. And Ajomo, we were being told, and we saw flashes of it last year, but we were being told that he could come in and step into those shoes. And I think for the most part he has. The numbers are good; they're not overwhelming, but he's getting pressure as much as Jalen Carter. When you look at the raw kind of pressure numbers according to Next Gen Stats. So the matchup I'm looking at here is him versus Coyote. Now I'm trying to pronounce his name correctly here, so please bear with me. Owashika, and you would think I would remember that because he formerly played for the Eagles. Deep reserve, yeah, but he didn't play much, so I didn't get to have to say his name very often. But so he's in there because the typical left guard is injured, and this will be his second start in a row. He hasn't played a lot. He did okay last week against Washington. But Jomo's going to be a different test, and he lines up on the right side. I thought coming into the season you would see them moving Jalen Carter around a little more because that makes it harder for teams to kind of slide protection to him and know on what plays to go to. It hasn't happened that way. So it'll be pretty much mostly Jomo or Jordan Davis occasionally who will be going will be going up against Owashika, and I think that's a matchup the Eagles can win.
I'm going to keep it on defense too, Jeff. I'm picking Cooper DeJean for tonight's game. Really interested to see how he fares against Amon-Ra St. Brown in the slot. St. Brown lines up there on 42% of his snaps this season. So St. Brown has had a good season. He is one of Jared Goff's favorite targets in the red zone and also against the blitz too. They always find a way to get the ball in his hands in those critical situations. I'm particularly not just about this matchup. I'm really curious to see how DeJean responds in the aftermath of last week's game against the Packers. Did not think it was DeJean's best game. He had a tough outing against the Packers. He conceded 5 receptions on 6 targets for 41 yards and 2 first downs, according to Pro Football Focus. So this is going to be a really big test, a big challenge for DeJean, but he has played at the level as one of the best slot cornerbacks in the league. There's a reason why Vic Fangio has been so adamant that they keep DeJean in the slot in the nickel package and not move him full time to the outside. And we'll see how he fares in tonight's game going up against one of the league's top receivers in St. Brown. All right, Jeff, crystal ball coming out. It's time for our predictions. This was a tough one this week. This is a tough matchup to pick between 2 really talented opponents. And I'm curious to know, what is your final score for tonight's game?
Yeah, I'm going with the Eagles 31-30 in a close one. I don't feel 100% confident about it. Last week I picked the Packers in a close one, and I was wrong. Could have gone either way in that one. I think the same thing probably will happen here. Yeah, look, you're probably wondering why I'm picking the Eagles to score to put up 30 points, considering where the offense has played. But I'm, with the injuries on the defensive side of the ball, with Detroit, I feel like there will be opportunities to get the pass game going. It wasn't just so long ago that Jalen Hurts had a perfect passer rating against the Vikings, against a good defense and a good defensive coordinator. So I think he can get it around. And Jalen Hurts, man, when the lights are the brightest, he seems always to deliver. And I think A.J. Brown's complaints and whoever else inside has been complaining about the pass offense, I think they will be heard by Hurts, and he'll be a little more effective in the passing game. I also look at that other side of the ball and the fact that Sam Laporta is not playing for the Lions. He is the number 2 receiver in terms of targets and catches for the Lions. I know they have a lot of weapons, but losing that weapon, I think will hurt them, and that will allow the Eagles maybe ultimately to win it. Again, don't feel 100% confident in here, so just disregard everything I said if the Eagles lose.
Noted. Same here. I don't feel super confident about this, but the Eagles have made it very difficult to pick against them this season. I'm going with the Eagles 27-23. So a little bit of a lower scoring game compared to your prediction, Jeff. But especially, coming off of that last game against the Packers for the Eagles defense in particular, I think they have an opportunity to be stingy relatively against, again, a very talented Detroit Lions offense. But I need to go check the record of the Eagles record after A.J. Brown says something publicly, complains publicly about the offense, what their record is. Because I feel like whenever he speaks up and speaks out, good things usually happen for him or for the team. So perhaps tonight is going to be a continuation of that trend. Yes, and I think the injuries to Detroit are concerning. And even though there are quite a few guys out, there were a lot of guys that were questionable going into the game too. So that there are players who are going to be banged up. Everyone's banged up this time of year. That's understood. That's a given in the NFL. But it's certainly going to be something to monitor as the game progresses too. So yeah, it's hard to pick against the Eagles right now. Don't feel super confident about the pick, but we're going to go with it. 27-23 Eagles final score. All right, that is going to do it for us today. Thank you so much for tuning in to Inquire Live at Gameday Central. Just as a reminder, you can head on over throughout the game to inquire.com/Eagles Game Day. We'll be commenting with you in real time throughout the game. So we look forward to seeing you over there in just a little bit.
And if you want even more Eagles insight, please check out my podcast, Uncovering the Birds, where I take you behind the scenes each week with exclusive reporting, interviews, and everything you might have missed about your favorite team. You can listen to Uncovering the Birds at inquire.com/podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts.
Once again, that's all for us tonight. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you next time.